Under President Joe Biden, the number of individuals attempting to enter the United States without authorization via the southern border has skyrocketed. In the first year of Biden's presidency, about 4 years ago, Border Patrol reported more than 1.6 million encounters with migrants along the border with Mexico, more than quadruple the number of the prior fiscal year and the highest annual total on record. The immigration crisis has been a bone of contention in the nation's politics, with Democrats underplaying the threat while Republicans, especially those on the fringes, overplaying it. Beyond the numbers, this large influx of illegal migrants poses several risks to the United States. Transnational criminals, terrorists, and resource strain are to name a few. You're listening to Strategic Wisdom with Andrew Jose, an international relations and security policy podcast brought to you by Andrew Jose, a Washington, D.C.-based security policy analyst and news reporter. Joining Andrew Jose today is Todd Bensman, a senior expert at the Center for Immigration Studies in Washington, D.C. In today's episode, Andrew and Todd will be discussing illegal immigration and its implications for United States national security.
Todd Bensman is a senior national security fellow at the Washington, D.C.-based Center for Immigration Studies. He's the author of Overrun: How Joe Biden Unleashed the Greatest Border Crisis in U.S. History. Bensman's academic and journalism work have revolved around the nexus between immigration and national security. He's a prolific writer, with his analyses appearing in several major publications such as the New York Post, the Daily Mail, Homeland Security Today, Daily Wire, and the National Interest. Before joining the Center for Immigration Studies, Todd worked for the Texas Department of Public Safety, Intelligence and Counterterrorism Division, where he managed teams of intelligence analysts that worked in concert with the Department of Homeland Security and the intelligence community to identify and mitigate terrorism threats. Todd Bensman, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Starting off with the issue of mass migration, one thing that a lot of people have been concerned about is that the situation in the southern borders, with the influx of a large amount of illegal immigrants, could turn into a situation like Sweden or France, where you have multiple parallel societies. How close would you say we are to that scenario of parallel societies being realized with this mass migration crisis? Or do you think that's not going to be a problem that's going to affect the United States?
I don't really see parallel societies as being the problem with mass illegal immigration, not in the United States so much, because in the European states, in that context, yes, indeed. I mean, the Swedes are going to notice that there's a new, very large population of people that doesn't look like them with a different religion. Not assimilating. But in the United States, the tradition is assimilation. Everybody eventually caves, to some extent. And so we have lots of religions and ethnicities from around the world that are kind of living together as one in the United States. So I don't see the mass migration crisis posing that kind of a threat to the United States. Other people do.
The issue with illegal immigration, though it has been a longstanding issue, how do you think that the current immigration regime has contributed to this issue becoming an issue of large proportions with this massive waves we are seeing coming in as early as 2018?
The regime that we have in place is an ad hoc one put in place on purpose by the administration of President Joe Biden on Inauguration Day. Very, very unusual, very unique, first time ever set of policies that were implemented immediately after noon on January 20th, 2021, that had the end result of opening the southern border to illegal entry, rewarded by acceptance into the country and more or less permanent stays. That is something that no U.S. government has ever done before on purpose. There have been surges of illegal immigration over the border in the past, but almost every president, I think all presidents, have fought hard to wrestle those down to the mat to get those under control. Well, in this case, the administration orchestrated a purposeful superhighway, removing all obstructions for as many people, foreign nationals, as they could possibly get into the country in as short a period of time as they could, by eliminating border enforcement and ignoring every law on the books that required detention and deportation, and just simply choosing not to do those things. And the result has been, 10 million, 11 million people crossing the border, most of them staying in the United States, being rewarded for their journeys and the money that they spent to get here. That's very unusual. We've never seen anything like that in American history or in numbers like this. Millions and millions of people just pouring over the border in a 36-month span of time. Nothing like that, not even close.
Going back to the first question, one thing you said is, as of now, you don't see a threat of parallel societies. But as millions under Joe Biden's immigration policies flood the country, is there a point you think we'd reach where the rate of immigration exceeds the rate of assimilation, especially in this century where people are connected to their home countries, whereas in the past there was this geographical divide that separated immigrant groups from their countries of origin?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. We really don't have much precedent to predict the future on. We've never had anything like this happen before. So yes, we have had, the largest numbers of illegal immigrants enter the United States in the history of the Republic. I mean, it's just, we've never had this happen before. They're coming from every nation just about in the world. I mean, 170 different nations are represented coming in, all different ethnicities, all different religions, different shapes, colors, religions. Everybody's coming in. It's no longer Mexicans and Central Americans or Spanish speakers. It's people coming in from everywhere, Russians, Ukrainians, really, you name it, and they're represented here. Almost every nation on the continent of Africa is represented crossing the border. That also is, the diversity is also a historic first. And so I think that, that diversity of illegal immigration sort of prevents too much kind of compartmentalization or tribalism that you might see in a place like Sweden or Switzerland or Hungary or something like that. In this country is very different in that regard, in my opinion. But we are seeing very large congregations of people from Venezuela, and they're spreading out across the country. Some of them are engaging in organized crime. You'll have certain gangs entering the country to take advantage from all over the world, really. But they're just going to be another gang here.
What are the policies that constrain law enforcement from dealing with the threats that these gangs and also recently terrorist infiltrators who enter the country as illegal immigrants pose? Are there any legal constraints that are restraining law enforcement from dealing with these kinds of illegal immigrants and illegal immigrants writ large in an effective way?
Well, it's really the reason that they're not able to deal with terrorists crossing the border and gangs to effect is because the volumes that they incited to come have overwhelmed all systems, all infrastructure that was in place. When you add lower numbers, regular numbers coming through, you had an infrastructure that could deal with terrorists, filtering out terrorists, or being able to identify and detect gangs. But the problem now is that there's nobody to do it. They're too busy. There have been a number of DHS Office of Inspector General reports, investigations into this, and the most recent one concluded, for example, that border management agencies are unable to properly vet for security really anybody from the Middle East. They're too busy. The findings are very damning in that report. There have been other OIG reports that laid out similar vetting problems. One looked hard at the accidental release of a FBI watch-listed terrorist suspect who was accidentally released. We know that because everybody was so busy down there, and the OIG report lays out how nobody was checking their emails or their texts, or they were just all too swamped to notice that the guy had flagged on the terror watch list. They let him go and didn't catch back up to him for 2 full weeks. And then they had to do this operation to round him up, and it was, the current infrastructure has allowed, at my count, at least 6 other terrorist suspects to be accidentally released into the interior of the country when they should have all been detained and investigated and probably deported. So that's the kind of thing we're dealing with. They unleashed such a torrent of humanity that they are unable to operate the systems that are in place to vet for this kind of problem.
From your experience studying the issue of illegal immigration, especially mass illegal immigration, how organized do you think is this process from across the border? Is this an industry right now? And if so, how big of an industry it is, with people traveling down south and coming up all the way through Mexico?
Well, nowadays, the movement of immigrants is guided mainly, in my experience from my reporting down there, mainly on social media, because the people up trail send messaging to those down trail about where to go and how to go and who to talk to and where to stay and where to sleep and how to get a bus. And a lot of the movement, the mobility is self-propelled now. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't have to hire smugglers for short legs of the trip, but the advent of social media and cell phones, I don't think I've ever met an immigrant down there who didn't have a modern cell phone fully connected to all the media platforms, social media platforms. And there are chat rooms and websites and Facebook and Telegram and really, an amazing array of places where people can get good information, live-time intelligence information. So there are times when people hire smugglers to get them past certain obstacles, maybe to get themselves into South America using kind of fraudulent documents or paying somebody off, or maybe to get them through the Darien Gap from Colombia to Panama, or from Costa Rica to Guatemala or Honduras, short legs, and then ultimately to get over the southern border where you have to pay the Mexican cartels to essentially give you permission to pass, or they may force you to hire them to just, smuggle in. Again, all pretty short leg smuggling situations, but it's all out there. I mean, for anybody to find and see, and it's good information. It's accurate, up-to-date information from the people upstream to the people downstream and still back at home.
Even though lawmakers, even law enforcement in these countries that are transit countries have access to the information either through their own monitoring or information given to them by the United States, do you think that some of the countries are deliberately ignoring and refusing to deal with this issue of mass migration to the United States through their countries? Do you think there's a possibility that these countries that are on the way are using mass migration as a negotiation chip to get concessions from the United States?
Yes and no. Yes, I do believe some countries are weaponizing mass migration to get what they want. For example, Mexico is a great recent example where the president of Mexico recently went on 60 Minutes and said, I want $20 billion from the United States to slow down this immigration flow through my country. And the interviewer on 60 Minutes said, well, that sounds like blackmail. What if they don't pay you? And he said, well, then the migration will continue through my territory. So that sort of thing, I think, also has been documented fairly well for Cuba, which opened its air routes to Managua, Nicaragua, and half the country flew to Managua as fast as they could possibly get out, because once you're in Nicaragua, then you're on the trails north. And so somebody in the administration cut a deal with the Cubans and said, listen, we'll give you all these concessions if you shut the air traffic down. And they did, and anytime they want concessions, then they can just open the air route again, But also, I think that a lot of this is not run like that. People are coming to the country on their own decision, by their own decision, because they know with almost 100% certainty that the Americans are going to let them in at the border and let them stay in for years and years and never deport them. That information is an incredible narcotic. It's a narcotic elixir that is simply irresistible around the world when you know that the Americans are going to let you in to a high percentage degree. It. I think recently DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas said out loud in a congressional hearing that he believes north of 85% of everybody who reaches the border and crosses it gets to stay. So, of course they're coming. Nobody really needs to organize it, but I do believe that some countries have weaponized it to their benefit. One last thing on your question is that it's in the national interest of transit countries like Panama and Costa Rica, Colombia, not to block the flow, because if they block the flow, they're stuck with the hot potato. Thousands and thousands of angry, hungry, needy immigrants from around the world stuck in their country. And so it's in their interest to do everything that they can to facilitate the movement north out of their country so that it's not a burden to the public treasury or anything else, any other kind of social ills that come with it. As long as they're moving through, that's good for them. It's in their national interest to make sure that they're all moving through. And that's why countries like Colombia and Costa Rica and Nicaragua and Honduras, Guatemala, and up until very recently, Mexico, made sure that everybody kind of kept moving through.
You mentioned a large number of these illegal immigrants not being deported. Why do you think that this is the case? Is it the principle of non-refoulement? Or is it just that there's a lot of them that the government cannot deport? all of them, many of them, or most of them as fast as we'd like to.
The clue to that is in the campaign literature of the Biden administration and the Harris campaign before the election, where all of the Democratic candidates for the nomination, rather, there were like 14 or 15 of them at one point, were all vying to be the administration that would end deportation and detention. It's part of an ideology that holds a far left ideology that views deportation as inhumane and cruel, and sort of something on the order of Jim Crow laws or slavery, that need to where those laws that require deportation are out of date and need to be eliminated because mobility between countries is viewed by them as an inalienable human right. And they say this in all of their literature. Their people talk about it in speeches. They testify to it under oath in front of Congress that deportation is wrong at all times, except in the case of terrorists, I guess. But in all other cases, it's a net gross wrong. And so they told us that they were going to end deportation, and they did it immediately. From the interior of the country, the Biden administration followed through on its campaign promise to end deportation and even to do a mass amnesty for millions and millions of people, which they tried to do. They followed through on that promise too. So we've had very, very low deportation since Inauguration Day. They put a moratorium on deportation right on Inauguration Day. A court overturned it, but they found another way to do it. And they're just not into deportation. They hate it. They think it's cruel and terrible and wrong. They're like deportation abolitionists.
With a lot of information about routes being given to these illegal immigrants, is there any role that U.S.-based nonprofits, NGOs, or activists play in trying to get them into the country? And if so, has there been any legislative or law enforcement action that we know of that has been taken against such kind of nonprofits or activists who are based in the U.S. but are resisting people with coming in illegally?
Right. Well, the political appointee layers in the Biden administration almost universally come from the NGOs that work in this wheelhouse, that are migrant advocacy groups, resettlement groups, groups that get contracts and grants in the millions and millions of dollars and donations from the public to help resettle and move immigrants around the world. And those are the people who also happen to be the architects of these incredibly strange and historic new policies that the world has never seen before. And one can only conclude that they're feathering their own nests, that their former employers in the NGO world are becoming incredibly fat with profit on grants from the State Department, from FEMA, from USAID, flowing into their coffers to handle the crisis that they engineered. I've talked about this before. It reminds me of when President Eisenhower, at the end of his term, warned about the military-industrial complex, that, we can never let the military, the people that make bombs and tanks and planes, ever get too much influence over U.S. foreign policy, lest we be perennially at war, so that they can profit on the bullets and guns that they make. And he warned about that. And what has happened here is that the NGO industrial complex gained control of the southern border and immigration policy and opened up the gates wide and have been profiting by it ever since, by the hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, the billions of dollars in federal contracts to manage it and in grant money. And the day that the spigot closes and the numbers fall is the day that their money stops. And I think that that's a very, very influential and important driver of this mass migration crisis that was engineered by those people in the White House, in the Domestic Policy Council, at DHS, and all of its agencies that work on the border.
One of the things that people have argued as being a source of incentive for a lot of illegal immigrants to come are loopholes for regularization. One of the common ones is a marriage to a U.S. citizen route. What do you think are loopholes to regularization that illegal immigrants are banking on? The ones I'm asking about are those that are apart from the refusal to deport on the part of the government.
Well, there are a number of problems with the asylum law as it currently stands, which to me amount to a loophole, wherein, in most countries like in Europe, if you cross into Hungary or one of the EU countries on the external on the external borders of the EU, you have to apply for asylum in that country because it's the first place you came to, and you can't apply for asylum elsewhere. We have a similar agreement only with Canada, where if the Canadians turn you down for asylum, you can't then go to the United States and try to shop an asylum claim there. But our law does not provide, other than that individual bilateral agreement, our asylum law does not provide the same kind of principle and restriction. So people are able to cross through 10 different safe countries and then apply in the U.S. That's a very unusual loophole for the asylum law. Or they may have asylum in Mexico, a lot of them do, or Central America, they applied somewhere else in Chile or Brazil and they got it, safe haven and residency. But our law doesn't recognize that somebody was already safe in another country, and we take them anyway and let them apply for asylum here, which has the net effect of just being here permanently, because that loophole has attracted so many millions that the backlog to adjudicate any of these cases is 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and even longer. And when you lose your case, as most inevitably do, you just disappear and say, "Come get me," and you're almost guaranteed, because so many millions are here doing the same thing, your odds of actually being rounded up somewhere and deported are next to nothing. So the loophole, the asylum loophole of, we don't really recognize or check whether you had asylum somewhere else or traveled through multiple safe countries already, you can still apply here, is crazy for people who live here. But for the immigrants, it's like the best thing that ever happened. They can't even believe their lucky stars that the Americans are so dumb to be the only country in the world that does that. Doesn't care if you had asylum in 2 or 3 other countries already. We're not going to check. We're going to let you in anyway. That is a huge incentive loophole. And that's one of many. There are lots of other ones.
What are the issues with the legal immigration system that you think is contributing to the issue we have with illegal immigration?
The big complaint about legal immigration is that it takes too long. and it's expensive and time consuming. And people don't want to do it if they know that they can get in right away and fast and fairly cheaply by illegally entering. So the validity of the legal system depends entirely on the enforcement against the illegal entries. Once you allow illegal entries en masse like this, you really why would anybody bother with your legal system? I mean, I can just cross the border and I'm in. I get the same benefit that you people who did it the right way are having to wait 5 years for, and I get it right away. Same benefit. I get to live and work here. And eventually I'll get regularized one way or another through an amnesty or temporary protective status or whatever it is, or just a policy of no deportation. I get to just stay forever, have kids here, and my kids will be American citizens. The legal system is sticky and time-consuming for a reason, because the United States is such a desirable place to live that it will never, ever be able to meet the demand worldwide to live here. And so if you don't have a sticky, slow legal system, you would have the entire globe moving into the country in an instant. So you have to have sticky, long, periods of waiting, and you have to really want to be here and be determined to be here to be able to do the legal system, as it is the case in every other Western country that's prosperous in the world. All of Europe has the same rules because they just don't want to have everybody below the poverty line flood in.
In November, we are going to have the presidential elections. What is the future you see for immigration policy and national security in the event of a Biden and in the event of a Trump victory?
I think that immigration, the polls are showing that the border crisis, and I always make a distinction between legal and illegal immigration. I don't regard illegal immigration as part of immigration. It's illegal, unauthorized. So that's it's the illegal immigration that is the political issue that divides the two parties, and is regarded as important as inflation, believe it or not, in this election. So if Biden wins, I think he'll view that as approval of his mass illegal immigration. Apparently, the country's pretty good with it. They don't really care that the laws are being flouted and there's no deportation, and everybody who hits the border pretty much gets in or has all these other new legal pathways that were created to come in. And, we saw this in 2022 at the midterms, when Republicans did not fare as well as everybody thought they would on the immigration issue. And Biden was asked, does the outcome of the November or the midterm elections make you want to change policies on the illegal immigration issue? And he said no. He says the outcome shows that they like what we're doing. And I think the same would be true if he wins in the fall, in November. And of course, Trump is telling you right now what he's going to do. And so I think we would see the spigots open wide and stay open for another 4 years. So we'd have another 10 or 15 million people from around the world come in, and you'd have altogether over the 8 years, 25, 30 million people just pour in over the southern border with all of the problems that portends. And I think if Trump wins, he's telling us what he's going to do. He's going to close the border, reduce the numbers coming across, eliminate all of those ad hoc, legal, quote unquote, entry programs that have been created. And he'll begin a massive deportation deportation program from the interior to try to catch up. So that's the difference on that issue between the two candidates. Very stark.
The so-called anti-communism lobby is a very influential group, and one of the criticisms they often have of policies that restrict illegal immigration has been that it could target and inhibit people from Venezuela, Cuba, China, and other countries suffering from communism from seeking asylum in the United States. Do you think that these interest groups are going to have a restraining effect on any Trump plan to deal with illegal immigration?
Well, I mean, one thing about people coming from communist dictatorships, and I put that in quotes, how communist really are they anymore, any of them, is that many of them are already living safely in other countries. Millions of Venezuelans. Last time I heard or read, there were 7 or 8 million Venezuelans living in Colombia happily, and in 15 other countries that are other than Venezuela. I'm not sure why they need to all of a sudden be rescued from perfectly safe and prosperous countries like Chile. And same goes with Cubans who are living all over the world in safe countries, all over Europe, all over the Caribbean and South America, making a living and not being persecuted by communists. So why would they absolutely need to be rescued all of a sudden by an American policy of letting millions and millions of people into the country all of a sudden when they're already safe? I don't know if that gets at your question.
Ladies and gentlemen, you just listened to Todd Bensman of the Center for Immigration Studies. Todd Bensman, thank you for your time.
Strategic Wisdom with Andrew Jose is an initiative of Andrew Jose Media. The views expressed by guests on this show do not necessarily represent the official positions and opinions of Andrew Jose, Andrew Jose Media, and Strategic Wisdom.
Thank you for listening to Strategic Wisdom. Be sure to follow and subscribe to us on whatever podcast platform you are using to listen to this show in order to not miss out any future interviews and conversations that Andrew Jose will bring to you on this podcast. We're streaming on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Yandex, JioSaavn, Amazon Music, and many other podcast streaming services. Also, be sure to subscribe to Strategic Wisdom on Substack at strategicwisdom.substack.com and to follow Strategic Wisdom on Twitter and Instagram at StratWisdom. Do support our work by buying from our merch store. For more details, visit strategicwisdom.substack.com.
Thank you so much, Gabby, and thank you so much, Ian. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your host, Andrew Jose, signing off.